Perfect.
All right, everybody, what's going on? And welcome to today's edition of SWAC Talk, the show where we cover the SWAC inside and out. And I'm your tour guide around the SWAC, C. Wells, coming at you. And today we're going to continue our 2023 season recaps. We talking Bethune-Cookman Wildcat football for the 2023 fall season. But before we get into that, you can hit those socials: Facebook is SWAC Talk, Instagram SWAC Talk, Twitter SWAC Talk 76. We'll be letting you know when each video in this series will be dropping. So make sure you check the socials out for that. And also any other upcoming show information, you can catch it on all the socials. I'm probably more active on Twitter in terms of kind of going back and forth and interaction. So if you want to hit me up, definitely hit me up on Twitter. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it, feel free to comment. And we will be giving away around the new year, sometime probably shortly after that. We'll be giving away some free memberships to the channel. So keep it locked on how to do that. Or if you're not able to do that, then make sure you hit that join button to become a member. Check out all the perks on the join screen. You can also use the super chat to show a little love that way, or you can donate to the show using the Cash App $SWAG Talk. Anything will be appreciated. So let's go ahead and jump into this Bethune-Cookman recap. The Wildcats, their season got off to before the season even started. This team was facing an uphill battle their entire way. They did not hire they had a very interesting hiring process for their coach. First, as you know, they hired Ed Reed. That situation fell through, and Raymond Woody was announced as the head coach on February 5th. After National Signing Day, so he was already kind of behind the eight ball in terms of recruiting. So they kind of piecemeal a group of guys. They were kind of active in the portal, kind of getting what they could, and they kind of set the stage for a team that would probably not be that great this season, but I thought they remained steadfast, and I thought they were very competitive. One of the things that I really was kind of focusing on during my preseason preview was I thought that this team's main goal was to be competitive, and that's what I said for all the teams like Valley, Pine Bluff, Bethune-Cookman. I thought that being competitive was vital for a team like this with their kind of backs against the wall early, not knowing what you have, not knowing what you're gonna have, not knowing what you'll be. I thought that that was the main thing to do, was to just kind of be competitive, and hang in there and see where it turns out for you. This team exceeded my predictions by one game. I predicted the Wildcats to finish 2-9 and 1-7 in conference. They finished 3-8 and 2-6 in conference, and had some chances in other games to pick up some wins, primarily on the strength of a very underrated defense. Offensively, they weren't great. They had their ups and downs, but defensively, they were pretty solid compared to where they were a season ago, which to me is a big step forward for this team. Being able to kind of build on your defense, will allow your offense to come around. I think it's easier to. I think sometimes it's easier to be successful when you can stop people. That allows you time to get your offense together. So I think that was where they were. So looking at their 2023 schedule, they opened up their season with a 56-14 loss to Memphis. Ironically, both of their touchdowns in that game were scored by their defense. So that should have, kind of set the tone for the early portion of the season to know where they were defensively. They beat Savannah State 31-6 the following week. Um, the next on a short week on a Thursday, they went to Miami and lost to the Hurricanes 48-7. They came back and played at Jackson State on September 23rd, lost their game 22-16. October 7th, they lost at Bama State 19-14. They lost to Texas Southern 34-31. Then they lost to Southern 28-18. So as you can see, once they got into SWAC play, their first four losses were by 10 points or less. So they had already started to kind of get themselves going defensively. And against Texas Southern, they actually had a pretty solid offensive game, scoring 31 points, which would tie their season high, which is a mark they scored three times. So they, like I said, coming out of the Southern game, they would go to Grambling and lose that game 28-14 before they beat Valley on a Thursday night 20-7, and then they would beat Alabama A&M 31-14 in a game that they really played. This was probably their best offensive game. They ran the ball for over 400 yards in this game. Really, just a great offensive effort for the Wildcats. Closing out their home schedule with a win, and actually falling behind in this game 14-0 before they scored 31 unanswered. All doing it on the ground, 412 yards of offense on the ground, average 7.1 yards per carry. They ran the ball 58 times in that game. They had 4 touchdowns. Only threw the ball 19 times for 68 yards. So they were really this game. They were really run heavy. They finished the night with 3 people over 100 yards. Walter Simmons, 165 yards. Jimmy Robinson, 137. And Makari Shaw, 109. Shaw was a guy who kind of came on late in the season and gave them another weapon. And then they would close out their season against Florida A&M, losing that game 24-7. Basically, when you look at this team, their offense was probably their Achilles heel, and there were reasons for that. But before we get into that part, let's look at how the Wildcats did in 2022, and we'll compare that to what they did this season. They were 7th in scoring offense in 2022 with 23.5 points per game. They were 12th in scoring defense at 39.5 points per game. They were 4th in total offense at 365.9 yards per game. They were 10th in total defense at 411.6 yards per game. 8th in rushing offense at 144.4 yards per game. 10th in rushing defense, 207.3 yards per game. They were 23rd. They were 3rd in passing offense at 221.5 yards per game. 9th in passing defense, 204.4 yards per game. They were 12th in sacks against with 42. They were 11th in sacks by the defense at 20. They were 9th in interceptions with 9. They were 5th in third down conversion rate at 39.3%. They were 12th in third down defense at 46.9%. They were 12th in fourth down offense at 22.8%, and 11th in fourth down defense at 52.6%. So as you can see, this team was really, really bad on defense in 2022. They ranked no higher than 9th in any stat. Offensively, their offense was surprisingly efficient that year. They were plagued by some turnovers, but their offense was actually not bad in 2022. I'm looking at 23. Their scoring went down to 18.5 points per game. That's good for 10th in the league. The defense rose to 6th at 26 points per game. Total offense dropped to 11th at 260.4 yards per game. That's a decrease of over 100 yards plus per game. Total defense finished 8th at 377 yards per game, so they shaved off about 30 plus yards per game off of the 2022 numbers. Rushing offense, they dropped to 9th at 125.5 yards per game. Rushing defense, they jumped to 8th at 168 yards per game. Passing offense, they dropped to 12th at 134.8 yards per game. Passing defense, 9th, 209.5 yards per game. They were 9th in sacks allowed at 33. They were 8th in sacks by the defense at 22. They were 7th in interceptions again with 9. They were 10th and third down offense at 31.1%. They were third and third down defense at 33.3%. Second and fourth down offense at 68.4%, and they were ninth and fourth down defense at 60%. So as you can see, their numbers on defense got a lot better. Still not great, but when you look at where this team was coming into the season and what they had brought back on defense, um, that was a very good improvement. Offensively, they regressed, and that's to be expected. When you play multiple quarterbacks, your offensive line, it's kind of patchwork. Your running game is not that great. Nothing on your offense was really good. And you had injury to your quarterback. You had just changing in quarterbacks due to production, and the offensive line kind of struggled to protect. So you can understand why those numbers dropped last season. That they had better quarterback play. They had some better guys on the outside, Marcus Riley, Kamari Everett. Losing guys like that, Quishon Bird at running back. Those are guys that are big weapons for you that you lost last season. So you had to replace those guys. Plus, all new guys, new coaching staff. So a lot of those numbers were to be expected to drop. How they dropped off is kind of huge, especially to go from third to 10th in some numbers. But their defense kept them in those games, even with offense kind of playing the way that it did. On the average, 49, they averaged 35 yards per game on penalties, so they weren't a highly penalized team. They had 49 penalties on the season for 389 yards. They averaged 39.3 yards per punt. They were 21 or 25 in the red zone, scoring 16 touchdowns. The opponents 30 or 40 in the red zone, scoring 23 touchdowns. They had 13 fumbles on the season, and they finished with 10 interceptions, giving them 23 turnovers. The opponents had nine interceptions and 8 fumbles, so 17 turnovers, 17 takeaways, making them a -6 in the turnover margin. So that's bad, but that's not horrendously bad for a team that that struggled to move the football. Um, just for comparison, this team threw 13 interceptions in 2022 and 15 fumbles. So they turned the ball over 28 times in 2022, and they had 8 fumble recoveries and 9 interceptions. So they still had 17 takeaways and 28 turnovers. So they were a -11 in the turnover margin last season. So that number did improve a bit. So they weren't as careless with the football last season, but still not great. Uh, when you look at how this team was, and they averaged 4 yards per play, the defense allowed 7.4 yards. The defense allowed 5.8 yards per play. So they, with those 2 FBS games in there, that kind of skews your numbers a little bit more too, especially defensively. They were led in rushing by Jimmy Robinson. He had 153 carries for 556 yards and 2 touchdowns. He averaged 3.6 yards per carry. Walter Simmons, 72 carries, 308 yards, 4.3 yards per carry. He had 5 touchdowns. Makari Shaw, 21 carries, 144 yards. He averaged 6.9 yards per carry and 1 touchdown. Jaden Bivens, 36 carries, 129 yards. He averaged 3.6 yards per carry. And Jovinsley Basil, he had 26 carries for 108 yards and 3 touchdowns. There was 4.2 yards per carry. Now, this team didn't have a lot of explosive runs. Their longest run on the season was 58 yards by Tink Boyd. They also had longs of 47, 52. Those were their longest runs. So they weren't a very, very explosive offense. The longest pass play on the season was 43 yards. So again, not a lot of explosiveness, not a lot of consistency moving the ball down the field, and that's a recipe for not having a good offense. Luke Sprague, he started 5 games at quarterback. He played in 5 games at quarterback. He was 62 of 95 for 65%, 544 yards, 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. Walter Simmons, he played in 9 games, 64 of 127 for 50%. 496 yards. He had 2 touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Talik Bethea, he played in 6 games. He was 38 of 74, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions, 51%, 369 yards passing. Um, and Dominic Ponder was the other quarterback that they played. He was 2 of 8 on the season for 25%, 33 yards, no touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. Makari Shaw had a pass. He was 1 for 1 for 41 yards and a touchdown. Um, I don't want to use that word that way. Their running back who threw one pass had their second longest pass play on the season. So just not a lot of explosiveness in this offense. Tink Boyd was the leading receiver. He caught 29 catches for 322 yards and 2 touchdowns. He averaged 11 yards per catch. Dakari Allen Johnson, 34 catches, 284 yards and 3 touchdowns. Davino Ellington, 23 catches, 254 yards, no touchdowns. Amari Stewart, 12 catches, 122 yards and 1 touchdown. Jaden Terzado, he caught 11 catches for 109 yards and 1 touchdown. And also Jalen Brown had a touchdown reception on the season, and Jaden Bivens had a touchdown reception. So they didn't really have a lot of guys that came out and made plays for them in the receiving game. They had 5 guys with double-digit catches, and those same 5 guys had over 100 yards, and those guys had the bulk of their touchdowns. So they had a couple guys that they went to. Allen Johnson was their primary guy. In terms of receptions, he was more their possession guy. He averaged 8 yards per catch. And Boyd and Ellington were guys who also made plays. Boyd hit a couple big plays for them. They just didn't really have a lot there, primarily due to the change at quarterback frequently. Defensively, I thought this defense was a lot better than that it may look numerically. De'Aris Thomas led the team with 97 tackles. He was a really solid linebacker for them. Shelton Quarles Jr. had 53 tackles. Steven Sparrow had 45. Eddie Walls, another solid guy, he had 45. And Iverson Clement had 43 tackles for loss. Walls had 14 and a half tackles for loss. Thomas, 12 and a half. Adrian Hall, 9 and a half. Conroy Cunningham, 7. This defense on the season, they finished with 82 and a half tackles for loss. So they were really, really solid in making plays in the backfield. In terms of sacks, they were led by Eddie Walls with 4 sacks, Cunningham 3.5, Hall 3, Jones 2. Interceptions, the Amari Hill Robinson, the all SWAC cornerback, preseason and postseason, he had 4 interceptions to lead the defense. He also had 6 pass breakups. Jabari Judon had 9 pass breakups, and Clement had 7. Walls had 5 quarterback hurries. Cunningham and Thomas each had 3. They blocked 4 kicks as a team, and they did not record a safety. When you look at the special teams, Anthony Frederick was the punter. He was 47 punts, 1,934 yards. He averaged 41 yards per punt. With a longer 62 on the season, he had 3 touchbacks, 11 punts fair caught, 16 punts inside the 20, and 8 50-plus yard punts. They did have 1 punt block on the season. Cade Hector was 7 of 11 on field goals for 63%. He had a longer 45. He was 0 for 0 for inside 20 yards, 4 for 4 from 20 to 29 yards, 30 to 39 yards. He was 1 of 3, and 2 of 3 from 40 to 49 yards, and he was 0 for 1 from 50 plus. He did have 2 kicks blocked on the season. They also blocked two kicks. Hector would handle the kickoff duties. He had 41 kicks for 2,166 yards, averaged 52.8 yards per kick with 2 touchbacks and no kicks out of bounds. When you look at the return game, it did not hit as great as you would expect with a guy like Darnell Dees. He still had a solid season, but he didn't have that break, that big play as frequently as he did in previous seasons. This season, he had 13 kickoff returns for 296 yards and a longer 61, average 22.7 yards per kickoff return. Dakari Allen Johnson had 5 punt returns for 25 yards to lead the team with 5 yard average. He had a longer 13, and that was the longest for the team. Their punt return unit did give up some big plays. They gave up an average of 12.9 yards per punt return, and 1 touchdown. So that touchdown came on a block punt, but they kind of struggled in that aspect, and that's to be expected. When you look at their scoring, Hector led the team with 44 points. He had 7 field goals. He was 23 or 24 on extra points. And then Walter Simmons had 5 touchdowns, giving him 30 points. Allen Johnson, Basil, and Boyd each had 3 touchdowns apiece, giving him 18 points, followed by Robinson with 12 with 2 touchdowns. And then you had a lot of people with 1 touchdown on the season. Looking at some of their um, their game highs, Jimmy Robinson had a game high 25 carries for the Wildcats. His the season high for yards in the game was 165 by Walter Simmons. That also came against Alabama A&M. His 3 touchdowns in that game was also a season high. The longest run was 58 by Tink Boyd. That came against Grambling. 34 pass attempts by Walter Simmons against Jackson State was a season high. 23 completions by Luke Sprague against Savannah State was a season high. Also, 223 yards by Sprague in that game was a season high, and 2 touchdowns in that game by Sprague was a season high. The longest pass of the season was 43 yards. That came against Southern by Luke Sprague. 7 receptions by Allen Johnson against Southern was a season high. 76 yards was their receiving high, and that came against Valley by Tink Boyd. Allen Johnson had 2 touchdowns against Savannah State, and Boyd had 2 touchdowns against Valley. Those were the season high. The longest reception was 43 yards by Omari Stewart. That came against Southern. They had 2 field goals in one game by Cade Hector against Valley. The longest field goal was 45 yards. That came against Savannah State. Max Tulin had 11 punts against Memphis. Frederic had a 48.4 yard average per punt against Grambling. He had a longer 62 twice against FAMU and Grambling. Longest punt return was 13 yards by Allen Johnson. That came against Alabama A&M. Longest kickoff return was 61 by Dees, came against Texas Southern. 13 tackles was a season high for the team by De'Aris Thomas. That came against Southern. Cunningham had 2 sacks to lead the Wildcats against Southern, and then they had multiple games with one player with 1 interception. So as a team, their highs 63 carries against Texas Southern, 412 yards on the ground against Alabama A&M, and 4 touchdowns on the ground against Alabama A&M, 46 pass attempts against Southern, 26 completions against Southern, 262 yards passing against Savannah State, and 2 touchdowns against Savannah State were season highs for them. And like I said, when you look at this team, their record improved a little bit. Like I said, they went from 2-9 to 3-8, from 1-7 in conference, went from I think from 1-7 to 2-6 in conference. That's a slight improvement, and they seem to be heading in the right direction. It's I think once they kind of get themselves kind of settled and kind of get some stability, I think this team is gonna be a team to look out for. And like I said, I was impressed with how this team continued to fight through the season. That when you're struggling to put together wins, it's tough. Like I said, you open the season with a loss, then you win one, then you drop. Then you drop 6 in a row. It's hard to kind of see a team be able to put together any kind of win, and they were able to win 2 games after that. So they never, once conference play came around, they never stopped fighting, and that's always going to be a recipe for some sort of success. If you can just continue to fight and keep yourself in games and let the chips fall where they may. So again, I thought this was a better expected. It wasn't great. Obviously, I might be hesitant to even say it was good. To finish 3-8, you are what your record is. At the end of the day, and finishing 3-8 is not a good record. But when you had a lot of people, including myself, saying if you don't beat Savannah State, you probably won't win a game. To win 3 games is definitely a plus for this team. So I think they did what they could do, and they found themselves in a lot of these games, with a chance to beat Alabama State late, and just an opportunity to be in a couple of those other games. I think you can't ask for much more than that. So again, I thought this was a pretty decent season for Bethune-Cookman, and we'll see what the Wildcats do on the recruiting trail and into 2024. So with that being said, I'm your tour guide and running SWAC signing out, and we're gonna catch y'all on the rebound. Peace.